but appreciate everybody coming in on a hot summer day.
I
I'm
cannot hear
Charlie Kelly,
anyone.
chair of this is the Metro Purple Line Corridor Management Committee. Welcome everyone, and members, alternates, members of the public. If you're tuning in, more than welcome. It's going to be an interesting meeting of information. First off, we already welcome Councilmember Yang back on the committee. I think we're expecting Councilmember Goebel, but I'm not sure is here, but it's good to see people come back. Maybe I'll just start with a couple of housekeeping reminders while we're assembling. First, some of us have our cameras on. If you are speaking, it'd be great if you did turn it on. Otherwise, it's always the best practice to mute yourself if you're not speaking. And also, because it's sometimes hard to track, and Craig's going to help me here, if you'd like to speak, just try raising your virtual hand. That sometimes helps, and if worst case, just speak up. Feel free to use the chat for asking questions. We'll always keep that monitored, and just for everybody's awareness, we are recording the meeting, and that will be available for viewing shortly after the meeting's concluded. And it, along with all the meeting agendas, summaries, presentation materials, they're all at the website, metrotransit.org/Purple Line Project Committees. So that's kind of a lot, but it's on, I think we're displaying it here on the screen. Also, now that we've had a draft summary of June 6th meeting that was distributed a few days ago. So if there's any changes to that meeting summary, feel free to put that in the chat or let us know. We'll still have time before that's posted. So we have a lot of material to cover today. Some updates, community outreach and engagement updates, White Bear Avenue corridor, northern endpoint recommendations. So that's a big area to consider. And also, as a result of this CMC comments, we've taken a closer look at bus lane compliance and enforcement. Did a whole peer review. We're going to get a report on that. So unless there's any other questions, let's jump into the agenda and kind of start with our Community and Business Advisory Committee, the CAC and the BACs who have had meetings. And I think is Ianni Houmas there and Laurie Malone? And if they are...
yes, I am. Thank
jump
you.
in.
Yeah. All right. Let me pull up my notes here. There. Oh, there's no right there. How about that? Yeah, so we had two meetings to report on, and we'll start with June. And we got an update, went over an update for Johnson Parkway Crossing and options there. There was pretty bit of community engagement with the councils around there, that area. We just also discussed corridor comparison between Vento and White Bear Ave, and presented. There was some public feedback. There was another one actually just recently. And then in July, we went over the two different endpoints for Maplewood Mall, the Transit Center, or County Road D. And discussed the Phase 2 corridor comparison. There was some concern about loss of vegetation in the corridors. Any questions?
Hey, thanks, Yanni. Any questions, comments? All right. Well, I appreciate your staying involved, and I don't know if Laurie is here. Is Laurie Malone here?
Yes,
Well,
Mr.
if
Chair.
not,
Yeah, I'm here.
do you have anything to add here?
Nope, I do not. Those were the highlights from the meeting that I saw as well.
Okay, great. Uh, well then, let's march along and hear from Liz Jones, our community outreach and engagement lead, who is going to give us a little update as to what's been happening this summer.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Hi, all. Liz Jones, Outreach and Engagement Lead on Purple and Gold Lines. Just want to give a brief overview of our engagement period that we are currently in right now. So this is really the big one we've all been waiting for, comparing the Bruce Vento Trail to White Bear Avenue corridor. So you all at your June meeting received some of the technical information. So we've been working on getting that ready to talk to folks in the public to really compare the two corridors in as much of an apples to apples comparison as we can. And we did send much of this information out to all of you since we did not have a July CMC meeting, but I'm just going to go over that information quickly here. This is a lot of these images are from our boards that we've been out having meetings and pop-ups with folks, really comparing the two corridors. So you can see here a breakdown of the high-level overview of the corridors, how many miles, how many stations, frequency, ridership, cost. On the next slide breaks down some of those considerations a little bit more. So really, how many of us know these corridors are very close but very different. They're both eligible for federal funding, talking about impacts. Obviously, there's traffic impacts, more traffic impacts on the White Bear Avenue corridor, more vegetation impacts on Bruce Vento Trail corridor, and things like that. So really having equal talking points kind of on both sides as we're comparing corridors. And that's been helpful to kind of break down the highlights. And then at our meetings and conversations, we go into each of these points in more detail, but these are really the high point of comparison that we've been talking about with folks a lot. On the next slide, and I'll just add that we did send out a link to our boards to all of you. So it has a lot of detailed information. And it is, I believe, linked in this presentation as well, or I can add it to the chat later in addition. We talked through this approach with you in June, that we really always have our project hosted community meetings and open houses, but we really focus on pop-ups, tabling, canvassing in community, presentations with neighborhood organizations and community groups, just to really more so meet folks where they're at and have better representation aside from typical folks or folks who we generally see at all open houses, so that we're reaching as many different folks in many different ways as we can. We do have a survey, a detailed survey for this effort that does include optional demographic questions. We have a lot of tools. We still have an interactive map we've been using, a storyboard with all of our information, talking to folks, email, phone, doing big direct mailings for the entire corridor. Mentioned the display boards. All of these I'll get into a little bit further in our next slides here. You can go to the next slide, please. A sample of some of our materials. We have created updated fact sheets. We've been kind of bringing folks along with the route modification study process and sharing that out with communities, just keeping folks up to speed. We also sent out a corridor-wide postcard and have a flyer we've been sharing out about this engagement period, about our events and our survey. So these are just snapshots of some of those materials. On the next slide, we have additional examples as well. These are some of the boards that I referenced. So they really get into detail, but really provide kind of a easy to follow comparison of some of the considerations for both corridors. So we've gotten good feedback from folks on these boards and the information presented so far. Next slide, please. We also increased our media ads, again, wanting to reach more folks. So we have a number of multicultural media ads that we have that went live last week. So Minnesota to Oi, Sahan Journal, 3-Month TV, Somali TV, Levels Latina, Spokesman Recorder, and then Access Press as well. Disability community media will start today through August. So we're just trying to, again, reach folks more broadly and connect in communications and media that folks are already consuming. The next slide. This is really a breakdown of our survey questions. So it's pretty simple. Which corridor do you prefer? So White Bear Avenue or Bruce Vento Trail. We do ask why or what is important to you in selecting the corridor. And again, I did mention we are including optional demographic questions in this survey. So we'll be able to give some statistics for demographics as well for folks who choose to fill that out. Did include the very important question of how often do you use public transit as well. Definitely getting a lot of interest in the survey. So we've been promoting it online. We have paper copies at our events and pop-ups, as well as display boards throughout community as well. So we currently have inputted about over 600, almost 650 responses so far, and looking forward to that number increasing over the next month or so as well. On the next slide, this is a very small snapshot of all of our events and activities, but we have had 2 project-hosted open houses. We had good attendance in both Maplewood at the YMCA and St. Paul at Hazel Park Rec Center. We had over 100 folks in Maplewood. We had around 50 folks in St. Paul. We do have a virtual meeting coming up next week, and just a whole host of pop-ups that continue to be added and updated. So a few of these coming up, Hmong Village, Cochrane Recovery Center. We have just added a Minnesota Philippine Center event for this weekend, Central Max Supermercado tonight, India Fest, and there's a few events at Union Depot as well as the Maplewood Celebrate Summer events. We are also going to be doing a few pop-ups along the Bruce Vento Trail. Next slide. I mentioned this briefly, but this was really an effort that we implemented during our last engagement period that did really well. So leaving kind of display boards and information in community centers. So community centers, rec centers, libraries, we've added and built upon that effort to include some recovery centers, multifamily housing complexes, transitional housing. So we've been able to get some good printed survey feedback as well as promoting the online survey as well. So we'll begin to periodically check in and incorporate the feedback from those surveys as well. On the next, I think that's really it for that, for our current effort. Again, a lot going on, and we'll continue this effort throughout August. We are planning to have some stakeholder meetings with community organizations that will go into September as well, but really planning to have everything wrapped up before our October CMC so we can share in detail what we heard with all of you. And just a quick update on the Johnson Parkway engagement that we talked about at our last CMC meeting and that Ianni touched on a little bit. We got a lot of feedback from folks in a really short amount of time, really looking if the project wanted to move away from the bridge concept, looking at 3 at-grade design options. And the feedback that we received really led us to realize that we need more time for engagement and conversation. And further looking at the bridge as well, there was a lot of interest for the current bridge design. So we're just taking a step back and going to have further conversations kind of after October, later in the year, so we can circle back with folks on and you all on our next steps and recommendation for this. And we have, between last week and this week, just sent a note out to all the folks that we've been talking to and community and resident stakeholders in the area, just on our next steps and timeline, and that we will be circling back later this year as well. And that's really all that I had.
Thanks, Liz. Well, you've been doing a lot, and it really is helpful to have these kind of side-by-sides, the benefits, the trade-offs of the Vento Trail versus White Bear Avenue. And you really can see longer route, but it touches so much more community along the White Bear Avenue. And I know you're being busy with Johnson Parkway as well. Any questions, comments for Liz? All right. Well, hearing none, let's just jump right into
Councilmember Yang has her hand up. And
thank you for go ahead, Councilmember Yang. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering, Liz, if you would be able to share what initial feedback we've gotten from community members about the Johnson Parkway Bridge.
Sure, Councilmember Yang, thanks for asking that. So Chair and committee members, the at-grade options that we looked at, there were a lot of concerns from folks with adding new roadway that we proposed or closing roadway. And really the main concerns were for changing traffic flow in the area. A lot of folks relayed concerns about kind of their existing experience with the flow of traffic and some safety concerns currently. So changing anything or making big changes was really concerning to folks. So we ended up hearing a lot of support for the bridge. So there is a possibility that we may be able to keep the bridge design in the project. And we just want to have further conversations before we really make a recommendation to you all on how we move forward.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know. I just wanted to share about that fact that is consistent with what I've been hearing from folks that I've been talking to. Also, it just, that bridge is just a huge, huge change in like landscape and transformation in that neighborhood. And so I would love to have more conversation with you about that too and check-ins. But I'm glad to hear that there's going to be more discussion that you all have with community members. I feel that's very needed.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Yang. That's been helpful, what we've heard from PUO as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it really is important that we take the time to have it fully considered. I don't see any other hands up. Greg, do you see any? No?
you don't.
All right. Well, then let's jump into the White Bear Avenue corridor northern endpoint, and our project manager, Craig Lamothe, will take us through that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. So I've got about 14 or 15 slides that end with the punchline, which is the recommendation coming from project staff on which endpoint we are recommending you consider as the preferred endpoint for Purple Line, if Purple Line is in the White Bear Avenue corridor, which will be a decision that will come before this body after we complete the engagement process. Liz Jones talked about here a few minutes ago, and that will come in October. So first, I'm going to start off with just reminding everybody where we had narrowed things down to before we went out and talked to the public about the short list of options. And that was 2 different endpoints. One that would end Purple Line at the Maplewood Mall Transit Center, and then one that would continue on and directly serve the hospital and then end at County Road D and turn the bus and lay the bus over at County Road D along with a BRT platform. Some things that we're sharing here that you'll hear more about at your next meeting in September. Metro Transit's been working on Network Now, which has been an initiative of almost 2 years long. And there's a concept plan coming out shortly for public review and comment. But in the context of today's conversation, we thought we'd share 2 items that are directly related to what's going on up here in the North End District of Maplewood. So you'll see a Route 223 concept plan blue line. That's a route that existed pre-pandemic, that was suspended with the pandemic and is proposed to come back with Network Now, and Network Now is really resetting the transit system for investment between now, or when it's approved in the spring, and the end of 27. So real near term, really independent of what happens with Purple Line, and would come well before Purple Line, such changes as the 223. The 223 is shown here on this map as connecting the transit center to the hospital, and then it goes off the page toward Rosedale. The other piece here is a Metro Transit microzone, which has been a pilot in North Minneapolis. It's been very successful, and Network Now it will be proposing several more parts of the region to receive micro projects in the near term, and one of which would encompass the North End district of Maplewood. It would go beyond this area, which is kind of indicated by the golden cloud. So these are not exactly the district for that future service. But those are two services that don't exist today that would exist in the future and would exist before Purple Line. So a little bit about what it would look like for these two options. If we're ending at the transit center, Purple Line would come off of White Bear Avenue, turn onto Beam Avenue, and come into the transit center. We would make improvements to the transit center, as well as some modest improvements on Beam Avenue. That would total $10 million. We had indicated this, I think, to this body back in April, had a similar graphic, and we estimated about $10 million for those improvements. In contrast, if we directly serve the hospital and end at County Road D, we had been looking at two different options this past spring. Carrying forward the way we're treating White Bear and Maryland Avenue, which is a full street reconstruction. So that's what we had assumed this spring. And that's what's reflected by this image here that shows side running bus lanes after fully reconstructing Beam Avenue. You'll note that the yellow rectangles in the purple square, those are the BRT platforms. So in contrast to the previous image, if we're ending up directly serving the hospital and ending at County Road D, the BRT station would be on Beam Avenue versus the BRT line coming into the transit center. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in later slides. This was estimated this spring to be about a $51 million investment. So, but we have since started asking the question, do we truly need to rebuild Beam Avenue like we are for White Bear and Maryland Avenue? Because we're attempting to address significant safety issues that exist today on White Bear and Maryland. So we need to reconstruct those roadways. The team is thinking we may not need to fully reconstruct Beam Avenue for a Purple Line, and we might be able to bring the price tag from $51 million down to $25 million. The other option that we had shared this spring with this body and others was reconstructing Beam Avenue and putting both bus lanes on the north side of the roadway. You see that in the red lanes. You'll note a slightly different configuration with the BRT platforms. They still are on Beam Avenue. They're not in the transit center because Purple Line would need to continue on to the hospital and then to County Road D. This configuration we shared earlier this year was about $55 million. But again, very similar to the previous one, we think if we don't fully reconstruct Beam, do something less, we could get the price tag down to $25 million. So since we last talked about this spring with this body, we've gone out and talked to a lot of folks seeking preferences over whether to end at the transit center or whether to continue on and directly serve the hospital and end at County Road D. I'll start with what we heard from our project partners and stakeholders. Starting with Metro Transit as the owner operator of the Purple Line, their preference is to end at Maplewood Mall Transit Center. Primarily because of ridership versus operation and maintenance cost considerations, facility duplication, and safety and security concerns. I'll talk about each one of these pieces of feedback here in subsequent slides. Maplewood Mall or Maplewood City Council, we went before them at the end of April, talked to them about the two options. They expressed their preference through a 4-to-1 impromptu straw vote during that meeting, and their decision for preferring to end at County Road D and directly serving the hospital was because the hospital today is the second largest employer in Maplewood and is planning an expansion, which I will talk about in subsequent slides. We've also been engaging mHealth Fairview Administration, which runs St. John's Hospital. We've been talking to them over the last couple of years on this project. They have expressed a preference for ending at County Road D or being directly served with Purple Line. They believe that would be important for the expansion that they are planning. And then Venice Heights staff we met with, and they have a preference for ending at County Road D, less so about directly serving the hospital, but they have a proposed housing development that has popped up here in the month of May, so relatively new piece of information, and I'll talk about that in subsequent slides as well. A little bit more about Metro Transit's the impacts as from an owner-operator perspective. So ending at County Road D instead of the transit center adds additional facilities, 5 more BRT platforms, a layover and turnaround for the bus, driver restroom for the bus operator, another mile of exclusive or semi-exclusive bus lanes on Beam Avenue, and then more traffic signals, all of which add to a higher maintenance cost and puts more demands on a constrained workforce to do that maintenance work. It duplicates a layover and turnaround and driver restroom currently found at the Maplewood Mall Transit Center that serves many different types of transit services today. It adds additional route length, which means we will need to buy another bus, and we'll need to hire several more operators to operate that bus over the course of a day in order to provide the service plan for Purple Line, that additional length. There's also concern with less active neighboring uses near the County Road D bus turnaround and layover and station, which means fewer eyes on the facility, which it leads to potential safety and security concerns when you don't have kind of eyes on the facility most times of the day. Before I jump into some of the other feedback, I wanted to share what we know, and we know quite a bit about regional hospitals as ridership generators. Many of our regional hospitals are served by transit today. What you see in this chart are a few things to take away from is if you have service that's 30 minutes or better, which is what we're talking about with Purple Line, plus paid parking, that's what you're seeing in the upper part of the chart with those 3 facilities in yellow. They charge for parking and they have pretty good service. In the middle portion, you've got locations that have better than 30-minute service, but they do not charge for parking. And you see the bars drop a little bit. And then where you see the bars drop significantly is when you have less than 30-minute service and you don't charge for parking. And the other big key takeaway here is you look at the x-axis, the numbers there. So even when you have good service and you charge for parking to motivate people to use the service, you're still talking about 50 boardings per day from a regional hospital. So what does the federal model we're using for Purple Line say about the stations we're talking about with these 2 endpoints? What it says is that the Maplewood Mall Transit Center would have 375 boardings per day for an option that has the Purple Line ending at County Road D and directly serving the hospital. The hospital station itself would be about 25 boardings per day, and County Road D would be about 50 boardings per day. I will note, and I will get to this in the next couple of slides, the 50 boardings at County Road D do not account for the proposed workforce housing project. And the St. John's Boulevard station also does not encompass the proposed hospital expansion as well. But even accounting for those things, staff who do the ridership forecasting for us believe those numbers might double. So you might go from 75 between those 2 stations to 150. So keep that in mind as we get to the end of this set of slides. So a little bit about the hospital expansion. I mentioned earlier, they're the 2nd largest employer in Maplewood, 2,800 employees. They're planning an expansion that would double their facility size, add 350,000 more square feet, 68 more beds to the hospital. And that is shown in the facility addition portion of the image. You'll note the proposed Purple Line station would be very close to that expansion. There are also several other clinics that are not mHealth Fairview, but they are medical clinics that are associated with the overall campus. They're planning a parking ramp expansion to be able to provide the adequate parking for that doubling of facility size. And they are still in lining up the funding mode. So construction would start after they have the funding lined up for the expansion. Venice Heights workforce housing development project. So What's shown on this image here is a proposed housing project that just came forward in May. It was reviewed by Vadnais Heights City Council on May 7th. It's about 180 units of affordable housing, workforce housing, priced at 60% of average median income. And over on the right-hand side of the image, you'll see the yellow rectangle representing the BRT platform, the purple rectangle representing the driver restroom, and the red is the bus turnaround and layover area. That area is partially in Maplewood and partially in White Bear Township and partially in Vadnais Heights as well. Moving on to some of the interested parties that we engaged with and what did we hear from them. Cardinal Point Senior Cooperative Living is about 150 units of senior living that is just south of County Road D Station, north of the hospital on the west side of Hazelwood, which is the street that runs between Beam Avenue and County Road D. They're concerned with traffic today. They have a difficulty making left-hand turns out of their facility to go northbound on Hazelwood toward County Road D. Anything that adds more traffic to Hazelwood, they're concerned about, and so they are concerned about Purple Line adding traffic. So their preference would be to end at the transit center. Similarly, across the street from them is Legacy Village, mostly townhomes that are immediately north of the hospital and south of County Road D and east of Hazelwood. Their residents and HOA board members have indicated a preference for ending at the transit center for the same reasons as Cardinal Point, concerned about traffic on Hazelwood. We met with Real Estate Equities, which is the developer of the workforce housing project. And they indicated a preference for ending at County Road D. They saw synergies between their project and our project. A little bit more broadly, community feedback that we heard. We heard from groups such as people with disabilities and seniors. And what we heard from them was not that it's not important to have a one-seat ride to the hospital, and that would be something they would use, but they were not in favor of gaining that one-seat ride to the hospital if it comes at a cost of a less accessible user experience at the transit center. As you may note, when I went through those different options for Beam Avenue, if we're directly serving the hospital right now, the design concept at a 1% level of design shows platforms on Beam Avenue and the bus not coming into the transit center, which means anybody connecting from Purple Line to any of the other services, including the future 223 or the future Micro, would have to walk a distance, more so than they would today if they were a rider of the Route 54 that the Purple Line would be proposing to replace on White Bear Avenue. And then the general public. We spent about 6 weeks engaging with the public in many different ways, many of the ways that Liz talked about earlier. And really it was split, almost 50-50 when we tried to quantify what we heard. Mixed support for both endpoints. We heard from some folks that restoring a local service like a 223 from the transit center to the hospital would be just fine, therefore end at the transit center. And then we heard from others that really wanted a one-seat ride to the hospital from the east side, and they preferred that. But it was about a 50-50 split. So what were some of the key considerations for the project team before we made the recommendation that's on the next slide? Is that you've heard us talk a lot about it's important for Purple Line to remain eligible for future federal funding. We don't see a path forward for Purple Line if it doesn't get federal funding. And so both endpoints are viable from that perspective. The other aspect is weighing the additional ridership, which is 75, at least, maybe 150 average daily boardings against the additional capital costs, which if you did the math on the early slides I went through, that's about a $15 to $45 million more expensive option to directly serve the hospital than end at the transit center. And the operation and maintenance, that extra bus, those extra operators and those extra facilities, it's about $1 million to $1.5 million additional costs that Metro Transit would be picking up. One of the other key considerations is oftentimes we're going to lean into the preference of the community. And as reported, it was really mixed. It was a 50-50 split. And a lot of it came down to your vantage point through your eyes. What was important to you? What were your concerns? And how did you weigh the trade-offs? And then one thing just I wanted to remind this group, and it's always been on the mind of staff, is this project has a lot of history, 20 years or so. Connections to healthcare facilities and employment centers has been a long-term goal of Purple Line and Rush Line before it. I still remember the day when Rush Line was referred to as the mini health line, kind of mimicking the Cleveland BRT line that's known as the health line. And then I wanted to point out that the proposed federal funding guidance that just came out earlier this year that we're waiting for to come out as final guidance, and FTA is prioritizing these things. They're actually going to now require us to quantify the number of medical facilities and shopping grocery stores that a line like Purple Line is serving. We don't have to do that today under current guidance. We will in the future under proposed guidance. So those are all things that weighed on the minds of staff. So we've been talking to a lot of folks about our recommendation. You are the last stop today. We've taken it through all these various different committees, and now it's really up to you to give direction to us on what the Corridor Management Committee would like to do as it relates to Endpoint. So, if during a future committee action, Purple Line route is recommended to operate in the Whiteberry Avenue corridor and not be co-located with the Bruce-Vento Regional Trail, then the contingent preferred northern endpoint in Maplewood is recommended to be County Road D Station, so that Purple Line directly serves the hospital. The important part of this is the contingent part. Staff does not usually make contingent recommendations, but we felt the need to do so in this case. And those contingencies are as follows: that the workforce housing project in Vadnais Heights actually is implemented. That mHealth implements priced parking and engages with Metro Transit to enroll in something like the Metro Pass program. mHealth is enrolled in the Metro Pass program in one of their other hospital facilities in the metro area, so that's not a foreign concept to them. We believe both of those things would add to higher station usage at both of those stations. And at County Road D, the workforce housing project would help put more eyes on the station, make it safer. And then lastly, is that the last one is really more internal to the project team. We're at a 1% level of design. We got a long ways to go, but we need to figure out how to make the connection at Maplewood Mall Transit Center usable for mobility impaired customers, which is beneficial for all customers when we solve for that. So we need to figure out something better than what I showed on those earlier slides with the platforms out on Beam Avenue and it being a reasonably long walk for somebody trying to connect to other services. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would be happy to stop talking and turn it back to you.
Thanks, Craig, and really thorough explanation of a very thorough and important consideration for these two endpoints and your recommendations based on not just the advantages, but maybe, as you posted, the contingencies, some work that still needs to come together. Well, before we kind of say this is the way to go, I'll be interested in people's reactions, and especially if, I don't know if I had seen Councilmember Villafancia, Nikki's here, and then also I know Councilmember Reinhardt, you're here. This is your area, so maybe you want to maybe kind of weigh in with how you're thinking about it.
Okay, my technology is not working the greatest. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Wait, go ahead.
All right, I'll do my best here. Yes, this is, there's pluses and minuses to everything, but I think with the information that we received from St. John's about the fact that they're going to double, I mean, there's, this is only at 1% design, so we've got a lot of work ahead of us. But it does make sense in working with them and going forward with this recommendation. Again, there's a lot to be worked out. And I think that's important throughout the route. And what we're trying to get to here shortly, as far as the locally preferred alternative, replacing the one that's already filed with the federal government. So, so keeping that in mind, this makes sense to me. And we just, need to move forward with it so that we can move on with the planning and the design work.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. That's a great vote of confidence. Any other reactions, thoughts? from anyone?
I think Commissioner Zhang has her hand up.
Oh, Commissioner Zhang, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question for Craig, going back to the projected number of users. I still don't understand how making a stop at Maplewood Mall and then adding on the stop to the Maplewood one decreases the number. Can you go back to that slide?
I will go back to that slide. And no, going further would add.
Oh, yep. No,
This
it was the other one. Yep, that one.
This one.
Mhm.
So what numbers I don't have here, if we ended at Maplewood Mall Transit Center, I believe the 375 goes slightly higher. It would pick up some of those that would be going to the hospital. It would not pick all of them up. We do know for a fact that some transit riders do not like transfers, and we would lose them, but some of them will bear the transfer to get to their destination. So I don't have the numbers exactly, but the 75 shown on this slide at those other two stations wouldn't all go to Maplewood Mall Transit Center, but I believe about 2/3 of them would.
Okay. And then my other question is, for the accessibility question, wouldn't that still be a part of the project to be able to make it more accessible during the transfer station at the current Maplewood Mall transfer station? Yeah, the transit center there. Like, couldn't that still be a part of the design to make it more accessible to be able to do transfers?
Absolutely, Commissioner. It will be likely less. I don't even want to say that. We're at 1% design. But I'll give the example. So today, if you're riding the 54, which is what the purple line is proposing to replace, the 54 comes into the transit center. And so it's as easy. There's a lot of services there. But it's easy that you could get off the 54, walk across the same island, and catch the bus that you're trying to connect to. So literally walk a few feet. Short of bringing Purple Line into the transit center, we're not going to be able to replicate that condition. So we need to figure out how to make what I'm showing on the screen right now better. Because even here, if we got the bus lanes on the north side, you would have to walk across this parking lot. And this is also the entrance to the park and ride, which is 1,000 spaces. So there are cars going in and out of here. And then in order to get to where all the rest of the buses are. So we need to figure out how to do better than what we're showing on here. We believe we can. Can we make it as convenient as it is today for a 54 user to connect to other services? I don't know, and I can't promise that.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, my thought is, as we should be able to improve that as a part of the project, as well as keep that option of going to all the way to like St. John's over there too, to service those additional potential projects. So I think those contingencies that staff had thought about and considered are very considerate of the potential changes. So I am anticipating those changes. So I appreciate that.
Great. Let's see, Councilmember Yang, did you have your hand up?
Mr. Chair, it might be still up from the initial round of questions.
Might have been up initial round. Okay,
Yep.
Any other comments, questions? You can just speak up. Well, Craig, thanks. Great discussion, and thank you, Craig. We have next up also another important issue, the bus lane compliance and enforcement peer review with Galen Ryan, our transit planner, kind of review the findings and potential next steps. Take it away, Galen.
Hello, is my audio coming through?
It is.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Zelle, for the introduction. My name is Galen Ryan. I'm a transit planner here in the Twin Cities. I work with Kimberly Horn and support several aspects of the Purple Line project. Got my start in transit planning as an intern with Metro Transit on the Gold Line BRT project, so happy to continue that work today with Purple Line. I'll be talking through some research that we conducted on bus lane compliance and some enforcement. And so I'll review kind of high level what the effect of red paint can be on traffic violations in bus only lanes, high level overview of effective bus lane management, some research about bus lanes and the use of red paint, some research on camera enforcement of bus lanes, and then talk about some of the key themes that came out of our discussions with peer agencies who are currently operating enforcement programs. To start off, it's good to ground ourselves in what effective bus lane management entails. And so these may seem fairly similar for really any sort of policy approach, policy development approach, and that it takes first and foremost stakeholder coordination, especially here in the Twin Cities, as we have many regional partners that go into developing effective bus lanes. Enforcement is what we'll talk about today, and that can include through some design components and then through monitoring. Legislation includes that authorization for enforcement, what those fine amounts are, any reporting or privacy requirements as part of that program are included in the legislation. And then education can include media campaigns, infographics, about the use and design of those bus lanes to make sure that there's public awareness, and then monitoring of that program to make sure that it's following through on the performance that we're looking for, and so that we can get a sense of what the compliance rate is. So we have a great local example here about what the impact of adding a new bus lane is. And that's to say there was a bus operating in mixed traffic to now having a priority dedicated lane. And so that example illustrated here in the image to the right is from Hennepin Avenue South through the Uptown Wedge neighborhood in South Minneapolis. During the pilot of this part-time bus lane, Metro Transit studied the impact on travel time, passenger delay, and reliability, and found positive impacts across the board. And so adding this new bus lane decreases travel time, it decreases passenger delay, and all of that adds up to increasing reliability. And it was no more so evident than on snowy days when the roadways are most congested, that priority lane insulates the bus service a bit from those impacts. And so this reliability impact really is a contrast to the difference between this free flow and then versus those congested conditions. And so this demonstration of adding new bus lanes is replicated across the country and seeing these positive impacts. So we did not further research the impact of adding new bus lanes to begin with. So really what we wanted to look at is the impact of red paint. And so to do that, we looked for before and after studies of existing bus lanes that had no red paint before, and then they added red paint to an already existing bus priority lane. And so it should be noted that just with even the white striping, that overall compliance in some of these studies was high before adding red paint, close to 80 to 96% in one example. But still adding that red paint decreased further violations, improving the performance that we're looking for. The example in San Francisco found a decrease in violations by about 50% after adding red paint, and that's in spite of a growth in traffic congestion in the corridor. And then that decrease in violations is replicated in New York City, in Chicago, and in Portland after adding red paint to an existing bus lane. So those red paint, those bus lanes really helps prevent bus travel times being impacted by greater congestion on the corridor. A 2021 study on people's perceptions of red painted lanes did find that just that red paint does increase a comprehension of exclusivity. Now, they might not be aware that it's for transit use, but that red paint does help communicate that this is a reserved lane for someone else's use. And the study in New York did find through their evaluation that red painted bus lanes were less prone to violations than unpainted bus lanes. So it seems pretty clear that adding red paint does add an additional benefit to the corridor of improving bus service, but it still may not get you where you really want to be, and so that's where enforcement still comes onto the table. So on this next slide, talking about some enforcement strategies of bus lanes, there is enforcement through personnel, which usually includes partnering with a police agency or with traffic enforcement staff as part of a city DOT. Through design includes having an offset bus lane. That means it's not curb adjacent as shown in the picture here. Having that offset bus lane prevents conflicts typically concentrated at the curb as people look for parking, unloading, onloading. And then also through striping, red paint, any physical separation or additional design components. Through cameras includes automated and consistent monitoring of the corridor, either through standing or onboard cameras. So these enforcement strategies through research do tend to improve the return on investment, so they deliver additional reductions in traffic violations in their bus-only lanes. A study on cost effectiveness about these enforcement approaches on compliance found that maybe just white paint and automated enforcement could be your most cost effective because of the high cost of red paint and a great impact of enforcement. But agencies, the type of punishment can differ. A civil infraction could be something that threatens someone's ability to keep a license and usually needs a police agency involvement in the program, versus an administrative citation. It's a recurring fine for the violation. The location of the cameras that I mentioned a bit earlier can differ to be either on board, and that means it could be fixed to the front of a bus, and so it travels wherever the bus goes, or it's stationary, it's on a light pole, a traffic signal light pole at intersections along the corridor to capture the movement along just a single block. And then generating tickets is a big piece where the automation comes into play. That can be automated versus manual. Manual would look like someone needing to review footage to see when the violations happen, cut that video, and compile that to generate the ticket for the violation, versus automated where you have some artificial intelligence, just some computer software backup that can do that process for you. A little bit more about what automation is on this next slide. As I just mentioned, it helps about reviewing the camera footage and compiling tickets, and then it can even automatically scrub faces in the video. It can help to sense parked vehicles and then record the violation so that you're not running the camera a lot more than you need to be otherwise. Automation helps with mapping violations as you look to monitor where violations are happening, but even still with this automation, personnel support is so important throughout the process, in maintenance, in verifying those citations, in the resolution of it, and oversight of the program. So in this research task of this effort, we did look into some early findings about the impact of automated enforcement, and studies again out of New York and San Francisco found additional decreases. The transit speed increased, reliability increased, and ridership even increased in New York as part of this study, as riders perceived the added reliability of transit service with this additional enforcement program on top of it. A study looking at the perception of camera enforcement did find that primary concerns can be about privacy, about, is this just a money grab? Is there deception or potential for error? And so that study does suggest that we can address these concerns through participatory planning, meaning public engagement in the planning process, and trying to really generate awareness and implement demonstrations of the project prior to rolling out a full-fledged enforcement program. And so it can really come down to building trust and implementing oversight of that program so that there's trust to reduce that potential for error. And then lastly, it recommends providing a program that leads with engagement and behavior change that then invests that revenue from the program in safety through design. So we wanted to engage transit agencies that had existing enforcement programs to get some lessons learned from them. We engaged 6 agencies unintentionally with a cluster on the East Coast. All of these agencies have camera programs or are piloting a camera program, except for in Baltimore, where MDOT MTA is still using personnel enforcement, but we wanted to engage them as just some additional context to engage a partner that is not yet using camera-based enforcement. With this list of agencies, you should notice that it's a mix of transit agencies and city DOTs. And that's because actually in many of these instances, it's a city DOT that's operating the program, not the transit agency. And so we'll get into why that is in the next couple slides. Out of these conversations, we identified five key themes that we'll discuss on the next 5 slides. That includes momentum towards automated enforcement, what goes into designing the operations and maintenance framework, that program framework, what are some key criteria for vendor selection if this program could be operated by a third party or there is third party involvement, what are outreach engagement methods through that program, knowing that that's an important component in Metro Transit's work and an important component of rolling out this program. And then, though we didn't dive in too specifically to research legislative recommendations, we did get some feedback on what considerations are important for that. So first up, on momentum towards automated enforcement. Even Baltimore, Maryland, that uses personnel enforcement is now working towards implementing a camera-based program. And that is because each of these agencies was looking for consistent enforcement across their priority lanes, across bus stops, and was unable to achieve that through the use of personnel. It's difficult to sustain that necessary level of enforcement by partnering with police agencies, and it's also difficult to enforce moving violations with personnel, as that's those are violations that are very momentary and hard to capture without someone just sitting on the corridor. Using personnel can also lead to incorrect ticketing. In that same vein of inconsistent enforcement, in case there are different violations for a general parking violation versus blocking a bus lane, you want to make sure that the right tickets are being sent out. And then it can also be hard to objectively monitor where violations are happening, because those violations that are captured are going to be directly correlated with where and when that enforcement is happening. And so each of these agencies look to pursue camera-based enforcement to develop that consistent enforcement, excuse me. For designing and operations and maintenance framework, we've laid out a few questions here that are important to ask. Who has the institutional knowledge of traffic enforcement and ticketing? In many of these cities, they just expanded the authority of an agency that was already conducting automated enforcement of some kind, whether that was red light cameras, speed cameras, or speed cameras in school zones, just expanding that authority, and so that you tap into that institutional knowledge of automated enforcement programs. Who has a primary jurisdiction? These agencies were looking to develop a program such that someone would not be ticketed twice for the same violation. And so that could happen in a scenario where perhaps each independent transit agency has its own enforcement program. They all operate in the same bus lane. If two buses of different agencies come upon the same parked car, that person could be getting 2 tickets somewhat unfairly for just one violation. And so it's important to consider who is the primary jurisdiction to make sure that everyone's just getting 1 ticket for 1 violation, and that they're not getting 2 tickets in the mail. How will cameras be maintained? That goes into where will they be located? What are the access considerations about who should have access to those cameras? What violations are you trying to address? Is it aggressive driving on the corridor? Is it parking violations? Those can be achieved better through different types of cameras, particularly onboard cameras are best suited for capturing parking violations, whereas standing cameras are better suited for addressing aggressive driving. And then how will curb space be managed as you look to perhaps have part-time bus lanes? You'll typically run into violations at the start of the priority time when that bus lane turns over from a parking lane to a priority bus lane. There will be cars that people just didn't have time to move. And then if there is loading or unloading allowed in the bus lane, that could further decrease the reliability of bus travel through that space. And so if loading or unloading is not managed on the corridor elsewhere, that could be a persistent problem. And then will it be operated by a third party? How often? And what are the implications for what materials are owned by the agency versus the vendor? If there will be cameras owned by the vendor, then a new vendor coming in later on can provide their own cameras. Then continuing with talking about vendor criteria, important things to consider for staff developing these programs is what the level of integration with existing systems will be. You'll really want to prevent interference, whether it's just with bus driver sight lines or just with technological systems on the bus. You'll want to consider what the automation and management capabilities of the vendor are and what mapping and data availability you'll have. You'll want perhaps an ability to audit vendor activities. If the vendor has some discretionary responsibilities, it could be important to still maintain the ability to audit those activities on some regular basis, considering what the supply chain strengths or weaknesses could be when implementing that program, if they're shipping from overseas or somewhat within the country, then that could provide an indication of your confidence in implementing the program on schedule. And so to get the understanding of all the vendors out there on the market today, one agency recommended the International Parking and Mobility Institute Conference is the annual conference that all sorts of automated enforcement representatives and vendors come out to and provide a one-stop shop for all your vendor considerations. Outreach and engagement is that fourth key theme that we found in discussions prior to engagements, prior to implementation. Some outreach and engagement methods included canvassing businesses or press releases by generating a media buzz. After/during implementation, it includes issuing pamphlets with warnings, as both warnings are a way of providing behavioral change, and then adding a pamphlet in there to educate the public on the new enforcement program. Temporary banners over the street, similar to like an intersection banner about an art fair, that could provide a lot of high visibility about the new program. And then permanent signs on the corridors and on buses to let people know that there is automated enforcement going on. That's a key component of that outreach method about the program. Through each of these methods, we found that agencies are usually falling back on messaging about transit reliability and traffic safety. I think generally two things that especially transit riders can really get on board with as they look for safe pedestrian experience and better transit service. And so the last key theme that we found was about developing this legislation. And so some of the recommendations that come out of this for things to consider include the duration and location of that authorization. The initial piloting of a program could be just counting the violations and you're not actually sending tickets to anybody, or the pilot could include issuing tickets. To think about a schedule for legislative reporting, we heard a couple of recommendations about having a year to implement, having a year to operate, and then some additional time to generate that first annual report. And so even just from that first legislative authorization, it would be a couple of years before you see that first report on program effectiveness. And that's where many of the agencies we engaged are at now, really still needing to develop that first report on the programs that they're now implementing. With that, it's important to not let perfection get in the way of progress, and that can be summed up in a phrase of it's important to get your foot in the door. And so leave the door open for refinements in legislation through that annual program review, the annual reports. And it's important to have something that we agree upon initially, just get the program rolling, and then we can refine it as needed as the program rolls out. And so next steps for this are organized from now to big picture. Right now in front of us, we'll be developing a final report with program recommendations that will really summarize what I've talked through here today. Then soon after that, Metro Transit will take time to evaluate the report and consider what a pilot could look like. Afterward, Metro Transit will then engage regional partners to authorize a pilot. That could happen formally through legislation, or perhaps it's more informal to implement a counting exercise to just understand what the picture of our violations is. And so big picture for the schedule is that Metro Transit could look to move forward with a pilot in 1 to 2 years. And so that concludes my presentation. And we've got citations on the following slide for the research that was presented in that first section, but happy to take some questions on this research.
Galen, thank you. That is incredibly thorough and really important research. And as I consider the entire region, this goes way beyond just the purple line, and it's something we really need to be thinking about in the future. Fabulous. Any comments, questions?
I think Commissioner Zhang has her hand up.
Go ahead, Commissioner John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Galen, I have a question about the studies that you had looked into. Did any of them look at enforcement, where like who was getting fined or who was having all those violations, whether for the enforcement, if it had any like sort of like racial disparities in enforcement?
Yeah, the bus lane research on red paint did not go into that level of detail, typically focusing on the impact on transit service. And so we did find one report listed here, perceptions of surveillance, exploring feelings held by Black community leaders in Boston towards camera enforcement on roadway infractions. This report, that research, does dive into some of the equity considerations that you find in other research on traffic enforcement more broadly, more typically related to speed and red light camera enforcement. And so there wasn't enough specific to bus lane enforcement that I pulled that out in here, but did want to keep this research about that perception of the program forward. And that's where some of those recommendations really came from, to make sure that there's participatory planning involved in the process and leading with that behavioral change. And so those were community generated recommendations through that research.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would just urge the Met Council. It looks like that would be the bigger piece where your agency would be leading it, right? In that planning for that consideration, because just where I know where the purple line is going and also the route that we are considering, these are very very low income communities, and also we're nearing BIPOC communities here. So I wouldn't want us to further burden our communities here with these type of fines, and also want to encourage that we also include communities in the planning and design of this early on.
Yeah, great points. Thank you. And especially as we think about this, I think there's going to be a lot of community input, and certainly we, council may take a lead, but we will only do it in partnership with the counties and cities to make sure this is really making sense for everyone. I know Ianni wrote a couple of questions in the chat, kind of related to design. Go ahead, Ianni.
Yeah, I can clarify. It turned out to be gibberish.
No.
No. Thank you for that presentation. With photo enforcement coming from the East Coast, I just have concern, just like Mahjong had expressed. Especially in Philadelphia, there is a lot of disparity within communities. Germantown being one of the more common ones, but. If we do route and design planning well, I can't envision that we would need to add that layer of photo enforcement, because it can be done by design without having that type of oversight, just in the forefront. And then, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, Chair Zelle, we more community input for sure, as far as moving forward with something like that. The state has already put some guidelines down and historically regarding photo enforcement, and I know I can understand where some of the need and push is coming from, but I just protecting our own neighbors, we have to look at it very closely.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I agree, Yanni. Thank you for that thought. Councilmember Lee, Chai, do you have a comment, question?
Oh yeah, thanks, sure. I actually just got done typing in the comment. Yeah, I'm a lawyer, but my understanding of state law currently is that Minnesota red light laws do not allow using the camera to take pictures of the driver and only the license plate. And so the owner gets the ticket, but once they pay it off, then it stays off their record. And so I know this is going to the weeds, but as you know, these kinds of things are considered, that it's that we kind of mirror the current legislation as it is. But yeah, I want to thank Galen for this wonderful presentation. It was really thorough. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chai. And as you've been pointed out here a couple times, that we've had a few starts at this in Minnesota, and now it's getting more refined, and it's an ongoing conversation. But particularly as it gets to these bus lanes, it's just really interesting research as to even to the issue of red paint. Really does pay off. Something. Any other comments, thoughts, questions? See none. I think that that is great. Thank you so much, and Galen, for that report. And now you're all wondering, there's more steps ahead. So, Craig, why don't you tell us? This has been a complicated puzzle. We've considered so many things. We're continuing to. What's next? And we can spend a couple of minutes on that, and then send people on their way.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Liz said it best when she was giving her outreach engagement report. This is the time we've all been waiting for. And so we're doing the engagements over the month of July and August to engage with folks over preference over whether Purple Line is in the Bruce Fenton Trail corridor or the White Bear Avenue corridor. We now have all the information to share with folks, and now it's really down to what are folks' preference, what are we hearing from the community. So you've seen this schedule graphic before. There are a couple of updates. One, we are getting closer and closer to the right edge of this schedule chart. We are still planning a meeting in October for recommended alignment. So that's the revised LPA. What quarter are we in? I will note on the next slide, we are having to reschedule the appointment that's on everybody's calendars. We have at least a couple of CMC members that are unavailable on October 3rd, and that is in the process of being rescheduled. Today, we're here with the White Bear Avenue Endpoint. September, we are planning on coming forward with 2 more informational items regarding Arcade Street Station, which we've been doing a lot of work on, as well as the question that we were asked when in the prior phase that we answered, but then we're asked to look at it again when we were looking at a different quarter, which is, can Purple Line go any further north than Maplewood? And so those are the 2 things that will be coming here soon. And so specifically, so September 5th, we anticipate an informational item at the front end on Network Now. So hearing more about what's in that concept plan that will be out for public review and comments starting in September. Arcade Street Station location or locations, if we end up coming forward with a suggestion to you all that we carry forward 2 station locations rather than the one that we last talked to you about in April of 23. And then alternative northern endpoint viability, Vadnais Heights and Century College, looking at those again. And that's what the plan is for September. As noted, we're looking at rescheduling the October CMC likely later in the month of October. Liz Sun may have already reached out to most of you with a doodle poll to kind of find availability. So hopefully we'll be able to report on that and update calendars shortly. The other option that we still have potentially to come forward in October is if White Bear Avenue is at side versus center. And so that is also still potentially on the docket for this committee to weigh in on in October. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. Unless there's questions for me on schedule.
Any questions on the schedule of what's next? Great. Well, thanks, Craig, and thanks everyone for this meeting today. We did cover a lot of really important work and updates, and we're kind of narrowing in on these options. Just to remember that these meetings have been virtual, which I think have worked pretty well. We do have on the calendar Thursday, September 5th at 1 o'clock. And of course, if the meeting is not needed, we won't we'll cancel it. But right now, let's hold the date. And as Craig mentioned, we're working on finding the right date in October. But with that, if there's any other project-related items anybody would like to briefly share or ask?
Just one question. When is the planned application for small starts? Is that August of 2025?
So that's a good question and probably not a short answer, Mr. Chair and Yanni. So we're currently a new starts project. We talked a lot about new starts and small starts back earlier this spring. One thing that has come in as an additional piece of information is the federal government finally got around to issuing proposed guidance for this 60-year-old program that they have not updated for 10 years. And so after looking at that proposed guidance, which has not been put in effect yet, we believe we may have a path to staying in new starts, but those are things that we still need to work out. We also need to really wait until we have that final guidance. They may change it. So that's not an easy question. So I don't have a great answer. If we have to change to a small starts project, we would want to do that before the project development phase that was extended by FTA a year ago, which expires in December. We'd want to get that letter in seeking redesignation to small starts before December. So later in the fall timeframe, but we still need to make the determination we want to go down the small starts path or move to the small starts path. More to come.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Good question. All right, much more coming, but it's amazing to see that chart to see how much we have accomplished. So great work, Craig. Liz, Galen, good to hear from all of you. Good to hear from everybody. Thanks for your involvement, and stay tuned, and we'll see you soon. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.